The train left behind the smell of metal and dust as Alex stepped off onto the small wooden platform. The air outside the city felt lighter, greener, the kind of air that made you slow down just to breathe it in. He squinted toward the birch trees that framed the narrow dirt road and, beyond them, saw the red-roofed dacha that belonged to his wife's mother. He hadn't been there in almost 3 years. Elena had called him the day before. Her voice calm, a little hesitant. "Come for the weekend, Alex. The garden needs someone to fix the pump, and the fence is half down. You know I can't manage that alone." It wasn't really a request. It was an invitation coated in practicality. He said yes before he thought it through. His wife Marina was in Prague on a 3-week work project. She had suggested the same thing, though with less warmth. "Mom will appreciate the help. And it'll keep you busy." He carried his small travel bag down the path. The sunlight wove through the branches in scattered gold. The smell of wet grass and lilac floated in the air. When he reached the gate, he saw her standing near the porch, a pair of garden shears in her hand. Elena looked almost the same as he remembered. Maybe a little thinner, maybe a little more composed. Her hair, once chestnut, was streaked with silver now, tied in a loose braid that brushed her neck. She wore an old denim shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, and there was soil on her hands. When she saw him, she smiled. Not the polite smile of a host, but something softer, more uncertain. "You came," she said. "Of course," Alex answered. His voice felt too loud in the stillness around them. "I couldn't leave you with a broken pump." They stood for a second, not moving, each aware of how much silence lived between them. Then she stepped closer, touched his arm briefly, just a gesture of greeting, and led him toward the porch. Inside, the house smelled like apples and varnish. The kitchen window was open, the curtains shifting in the wind. On the table lay a bowl of cherries, a folded newspaper, a mug of coffee half finished. Elena poured him some tea, her movements graceful and practiced, as though she'd rehearsed this quiet welcome. "You look tired," she said. "Work," he replied, taking a seat. "Too many deadlines. I forgot what real air feels like." Elena smiled faintly, setting the teapot down. "Then you came to the right place. Here, deadlines lose their teeth." He watched her for a moment, the way she avoided his gaze when she spoke, the way her fingers tapped lightly against the table's edge. There had been a time before Marina and he married, when Elena and he could talk for hours about anything. Books, architecture, even music. Now the conversation felt cautious, like walking across thin ice. Outside, a magpie cried, and the old clock in the hall struck noon. They spent the afternoon working on the fence. Alex hammered in new boards while Elena held them steady. The rhythm of work filled the air. Wood, nails, breath, and the occasional murmur of "careful" or "that's good." At one point their hands brushed as they both reached for the same plank. Neither spoke. But Alex felt the warmth of her skin linger longer than it should have. When they stopped for a break, Elena brought out lemonade and sat beside him on the low steps of the porch. The sun had dropped behind the pines, turning the world amber. Alex leaned back, looking at the sky. "You really keep this place alive," he said. "It's peaceful." "It keeps me alive too," she replied quietly. Her eyes followed a line of ants crawling along the railing. "When you live alone, you start to measure time by what grows and what doesn't." He wanted to say something comforting, but words felt clumsy. Instead, he watched her profile, the faint lines around her mouth, the curve of her cheek catching the last light. He wondered if Marina had inherited that same thoughtful stillness. He couldn't remember the last time he and his wife had shared a silence that wasn't heavy. A soft wind rose, and a strand of Elena's hair brushed against his shoulder. She reached up to tuck it behind her ear, and for a moment her hand hovered near his face. He caught the scent of lavender from her sleeve. Something inside him shifted. Not desire exactly, but recognition, as if he'd stepped into a memory he hadn't realized he'd been missing. "You've changed," she said suddenly. Her voice was almost teasing, but not quite. "There's something quieter about you now." I guess that's what happens when life gets too loud, he answered. They shared a smile, and for a fleeting second, the years and titles between them, mother-in-law, son-in-law, propriety, seemed to blur. The moment passed, of course. Elena stood, brushing off her jeans, and said lightly, "Come, let's make dinner. You can tell me about your projects, and I'll cook something decent for once." He followed her inside, pretending the world was simple again. That evening, the kitchen was filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and herbs. Elena moved easily between the stove and the counter, humming softly. Alex opened a bottle of wine and poured them each a glass. Outside, the garden glowed with fireflies. He realized he hadn't felt this kind of calm in months. At dinner they spoke about work, travel, and Marina, carefully, as though discussing a mutual friend rather than someone binding them. When Elena laughed, her eyes crinkled, and Alex felt the sound linger like music. Afterward, they washed dishes side by side, passing plates and glasses like a slow dance neither of them acknowledged. By the time the dishes were done, night had fallen completely. The wind had grown colder. Elena lit a small lamp in the living room and offered him a blanket. "You can take the guest room upstairs," she said, her voice suddenly formal again. "I changed the sheets this morning." "Thanks," he said softly. As he turned toward the stairs, she added, "Alex." He looked back. Her hand rested on the edge of the doorway. "Thank you for coming. I didn't realize how quiet it had been until you arrived." He nodded, unable to answer. Then he went upstairs, his heart strangely full, as if the house itself were breathing around him. Alex woke in the middle of the night to the sound of rain. It wasn't heavy, just a soft tapping against the window panes, steady and patient. For a moment he didn't remember where he was. The faint scent of pine wood, the creak of the old floorboards, the distant ticking of the hall clock, all of it slowly brought him back to the dacha. He sat up, rubbed his eyes, and looked at the faint rectangle of light the lamp outside cast through the curtains. The silence here was so alive that it almost had a voice. He thought of the city apartment, of traffic and blue screens, and the way Marina would work late into the night without looking up from her laptop. He tried to picture her face at this hour, the reflection of the monitor in her eyes, and felt something close to guilt, though for what, he couldn't tell. Downstairs, a dim glow came from the living room. He hesitated, then pushed aside the blanket and went down quietly, barefoot, careful not to wake the house. Elena sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl, a book closed on her knees. A single lamp painted her profile in warm gold. She turned when she heard him, not startled, just quietly aware. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "The rain. It always starts around this time," she said, glancing toward the glass. "It's like the house remembers every storm it's ever heard." He smiled faintly. "You sound like you're quoting poetry again." "Maybe I am," she said, and motioned toward the chair opposite hers. "Sit." He sat, the chair creaking slightly under him. For a while neither spoke. The rain deepened, a slow rhythm against the roof. A candle burned low on the table between them. Its flame trembled every time the wind moved through the cracks in the window frame. "You used to write, didn't you?" she said suddenly. He looked up, surprised. "I did, yes. A long time ago." "Why did you stop?" He thought about it. "Because I stopped believing that words could change anything. They just describe what's already lost." Elena tilted her head. "That's a sad thing for someone your age to say." He laughed softly. "You make me sound ancient." "You sound tired," she corrected. Then after a pause, "You and Marina, are you all right?" The question hung between them like a slow pendulum. Alex opened his mouth, then closed it again. He took a breath. "We're fine. Just busy." Elena nodded, though her eyes said she didn't believe him. "She's always been like that," she murmured. "Too focused. Even as a child she couldn't sit still unless she was chasing something." "Maybe that's why we fit," Alex said quietly. "I was the opposite. I needed someone to pull me forward." "And does she still?" He didn't answer. Outside, thunder rolled far away, low and distant. Elena closed the book in her lap and leaned back. I sometimes think, she said, that people confuse love with motion. If it isn't rushing somewhere, they think it's dying. But sometimes love is just staying, being still. Alex looked at her, really looked this time. There was no pity in her tone, no judgment. Only the calm of someone who had already lived through disappointment and learned to make peace with it. He said softly, "You talk like you've known both kinds." "I have." Her smile was sad and beautiful at once. "Everyone my age has." The candle hissed. A drop of wax slid down the brass holder. He wanted to tell her something. Maybe that her voice comforted him, that the warmth in this quiet room felt more real than anything he'd known in months, but the words tangled somewhere between thought and breath. Instead, he said, "You should get some sleep. It's late." "So should you," she replied, but made no move to rise. When lightning flashed outside, it illuminated the lines of her face, not the marks of age but of depth, like a landscape shaped by weather. For an instant he thought she looked not older but timeless. He stood. "Good night, Elena." "Good night, Alex." As he turned toward the stairs, she added, "I'm glad you came. I didn't realize how much I missed having someone here." He looked back. "You're easy to miss," he said before he could stop himself. She blinked, caught off guard, then gave a small, uncertain smile. He climbed the stairs before either of them could add anything else. The rain faded near dawn. By morning the air smelled clean, the garden washed and glistening. Alex woke early and went outside barefoot into the damp grass. Mist curled over the vegetable beds, and birds were already calling from the forest edge. He felt lighter than he had in weeks. Inside, Elena was making coffee. She looked up when he entered and said, "You're up early." "Couldn't waste a morning like this," he said, grinning. She poured 2 cups and handed him one. Their fingers brushed again. Neither pulled away quickly enough. They drank in silence, the open door filling the kitchen with fresh air and the smell of wet lilac. "I might stay another day," he said finally. Elena raised an eyebrow. "Another?" "There's more to fix. The roof leaks a little, the pump still rattles. And it's peaceful here." "Stay as long as you like," she said softly. "The house will thank you for it." He wanted to ask if she would too, but he only nodded. Later that day, they painted the porch railing together. Their hands, splattered with white, moved in quiet synchrony. At one point, Elena reached across him to steady a loose board, and he felt the warmth of her shoulder brush his arm. She didn't move away. Neither did he. For a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The birds, the air, the ticking heart somewhere in his chest. Then Elena stepped back, clearing her throat. "We'll need another coat later." "Right," he said, pretending not to notice the tremor in his own voice. They worked until noon. The sun climbed higher, burning off the mist. Somewhere in the distance a car engine echoed down the dirt road. The mailman, perhaps, or a neighbor. The sound broke the spell. By evening they were both tired, their clothes marked with paint. Elena laughed at the sight of his handprint on her sleeve. "Now it looks like you've signed my shirt," she joked. "Maybe I did," he said. "Careful," she replied, but there was warmth behind it. As dusk fell, Alex caught her looking at him once or twice. Not the quick glances of politeness, but something deeper, thoughtful, almost questioning. He wasn't sure if it frightened or comforted him that he understood it perfectly. The afternoon drifted into stillness. Alex sat on the porch steps, his hands streaked with paint, listening to the soft hum of bees near the lilacs. Inside, Elena moved quietly from room to room, the faint sound of dishes and radio static weaving through the air. For 2 days the dacha had become its own small world. Work, food, silence, rain. He hadn't thought about the city or about Marina, not really. It was as though the noise of their life together had been left behind with the train tracks. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Marina. He hesitated before answering. "Hey," he said. Finally, Her voice came through sharp but tired. You disappear for a weekend and forget how to text. He smiled despite the edge in her tone. The signal here's terrible. Mom said you got the fence fixed. Almost. A pause, long enough for the distance between them to become a sound of its own. Alex, she said quietly, I'm sorry I snapped before I left. Things have just been a lot. I know. I didn't mean what I said about you not caring. He swallowed. It's fine. It's not. I've been thinking maybe when I'm back we should. Static cut her off. The line wavered, then dropped. He stared at the screen. The signal icon blinked once and vanished. When he looked up, Elena was standing in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. Marina, she asked. Yeah, he said. The call cut out. She nodded slowly. She works too much. Always did. She's trying, he said, though it sounded half-hearted. Elena stepped out onto the porch and sat beside him. For a while, they watched the sunlight play on the wet grass. She worries about losing things, Elena said finally. Even as a girl, she used to keep her toys locked in a drawer so they wouldn't break. Maybe that's why she holds so tight to her work now. It's something she can control. Alex gave a small laugh. I'm the opposite. I let go too easily. Maybe that's why she chose you. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight he couldn't name. I don't know what she wants anymore, he said after a while. Or what I do. Elena folded the towel in her lap. Careful, deliberate. You're both still young. It's not about knowing. It's about staying open long enough to learn. He looked at her. Do you still believe that? After everything? She smiled faintly. You mean after divorce, after years alone, after realizing half the things I wanted didn't happen? Believe it more now. Because if you close yourself off, you end up talking only to memories. The wind rose again, brushing through the birches. You're good at this, he said. At what? Making things sound less hopeless. I've had practice. They both laughed quietly. That evening they ate on the porch. The air smelled of rain and mint. Elena had made vegetable stew, and Alex, still distracted by the broken phone call, spoke little. Halfway through dinner, the phone vibrated again. Message, flight delayed. Be home in 2 days. Love you. He read it twice before locking the screen. Elena noticed. Everything all right? Yeah. She'll be home soon. Good. She smiled, though her eyes were somewhere else. After a while she said softly, You know, when Marina's father left, I kept telling myself it was temporary. I'd cook, I'd clean, I'd wait. Years went by before I realized the waiting was the thing keeping me from living. Alex said nothing. He knew what she meant. You're not him, she added quickly. But don't fall into the same silence he did. Even if it breaks something. Her voice trembled on the last word, as though she was speaking not just to him but to herself. He nodded slowly. I will. Promise me. I promise. She gave a small nod, then looked out at the garden. The sky had gone violet, the first stars barely visible. They sat there until the light faded completely. When the crickets began, Alex felt a strange peace settle over them, a fragile one but real. Later that night, he walked to the edge of the property, where the path led down toward the forest. The moon hung low, silvering the wet grass. Behind him, the dacha's windows glowed warmly. He thought of Marina, of the early years when everything had felt simple. He thought of Elena inside, her quiet strength, her patience. And he realized something he hadn't before. This weekend hadn't been an escape. It had been a mirror. He could see what he'd become, someone too afraid to fight, too careful to love properly. He stayed there a long time until the lamp in the kitchen went out and the house fell dark. When he finally came back in, he saw Elena asleep in the armchair, a book open on her chest. The radio whispered an old song, low and soft. Alex pulled a blanket over her shoulders and turned off the lamp. For a moment he watched her breathe, steady and calm, and felt a quiet gratitude, for the place, for her, for the pause that had let him see himself again. Then he went upstairs, his phone in his hand, and typed a message he hadn't sent in months. "Miss you. Let's talk when you're home." He hit send, then set the phone face down on the table. Outside, the birches swayed gently in the wind, their leaves flashing like small pieces of light. The next morning broke clear and bright, as if the world had decided to start over. Alex woke to the smell of coffee again. Strong, dark, familiar. Downstairs, Elena was already moving through the kitchen, opening windows, humming softly under her breath. He lingered on the stairs for a moment, listening. There was something soothing about her morning rhythm. The clatter of a spoon, the creak of floorboards, the sound of a woman used to filling silence with life. "Good morning," he said as he stepped in. Elena turned, smiled. "You're just in time. The eggs survived my cooking again. Miracle." She laughed, and for a moment, the heaviness of the night before lifted. They ate together quietly, sunlight spilling across the table. When breakfast was done, Alex went out to the garden. The soil was damp from last night's rain, rich and dark. He picked up the shovel, more out of habit than purpose, and began turning the earth near the vegetable patch. Elena came out with a basket, squinting in the light. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said, pausing to lean on the handle. "It helps me think." "Then keep digging," she said gently, and knelt a few meters away, pulling weeds with her hands. For a while they worked in silence, just the sound of soil, the distant hum of bees, and the slow rhythm of two people who didn't need to fill the air with words. Finally Elena said, "You know, this place, it has a strange way of showing people what they've been avoiding." He glanced up. "Meaning?" "When I was your age, I came here after my husband left. I told myself I was here to paint, to garden, to rebuild the roof. But really, I came to learn how to be alone without being afraid of it." Alex nodded, eyes on the ground. "I think I'm still learning that." Elena brushed the dirt from her palms. "Maybe that's what Marina's doing too, learning her own way of being alone, even while you're married. It doesn't mean she's gone, Alex. Just that she's searching." "Searching for what?" "For what makes her feel alive." He looked up at her, and for a moment there was no distance between them. Not mother-in-law and son-in-law, not two people linked only by someone else, but simply two human beings trying to understand the same pain from different sides. "You talk like you've already made peace with everything," he said. She smiled faintly. "Peace is never something you make once. You make it again and again, every morning you wake up." After lunch, they took a walk down the narrow path that led to the river. The forest air was cool, heavy with pine and wet moss. Elena carried a small thermos of tea. Alex walked beside her, his hands in his pockets. The path wound through tall grass and ended in a clearing by the water. The river was slow and brown, sunlight sliding over its surface like silk. "This was Marina's favorite spot," Elena said. "She used to sit here for hours, throwing pebbles and telling me how she'd leave this place and never come back." "Funny," Alex said quietly. "I used to think that about my hometown too. But the older I get, the more I want to return." "That's how it works," Elena replied. "We spend half our lives running away and the other half trying to find the pieces we dropped." They sat on the old wooden bench that faced the river. The world around them was still, except for the slow murmur of water and the cry of a distant bird. Elena poured tea into 2 cups. The steam curled up between them. "I used to think marriage was about finding someone who would complete you," she said softly. "Now I think it's about finding someone who will stand beside you while you both stay incomplete." Alex took the cup from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. "Maybe that's why it's so hard. People expect it to fix everything." "Doesn't work that way," she said. "You can't build forever on expectations." He stared at the river, feeling something heavy loosen inside him. "I think we stopped really talking years ago. Marina and I. We both thought silence meant stability. And now you know it doesn't." He nodded. "Now I know it's just silence." They sat there for a long time, the sunlight moving slowly through the branches. When they finally stood to leave, Elena said, "Whatever happens when she comes home, don't hide behind being careful. Speak, even if your voice shakes." "I will," he said quietly. "I know." That evening, Alex packed his things. The weekend had passed like a dream, long and short at once. He stood in the guest room, looking at the bag on the chair, then at the open window that framed the garden. Downstairs, Elena was setting the table for dinner. The smell of herbs and roasted vegetables filled the air again. When he came down, she looked up. "Leaving already?" "I'll catch the morning train," he said. "Better to be home when Marina gets back." She nodded. "Good." They, quietly. Neither said much. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty, only full of things that didn't need to be spoken. After dinner, they washed the dishes together one last time. When they were done, Elena handed him a folded towel. "Thank you for coming," she said. "It was good to have company again. Thank you for everything." At the door, she hesitated, then touched his arm lightly. "You'll be all right, Alex. Both of you will. Just remember what this place felt like." He looked at her, memorizing the quiet strength in her eyes. "I will." Then he stepped out into the cool night. The path glowed pale under the moonlight, the birches whispering softly in the wind. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of his life lift. Not gone, but lighter, easier to carry. The morning train came with its usual low, distant hum. Alex stood on the porch, bag beside him, the air sharp and cool after the night rain. Elena was watering the flowers near the fence, her movements slow, thoughtful. "You're sure you don't want breakfast before you go?" she asked. "I'll grab something at the station," he said. "You've done enough." She set the watering can down. "Don't say it like that. Helping each other isn't about owing anything." "I know," he said. "But thank you. For everything." She smiled faintly. "Take care of her, Alex. And of yourself too." "I will." The whistle echoed again, closer now. He gave her a small wave and started down the path toward the platform. The birches shimmered in the morning light, their leaves whispering like soft farewells. By the time Marina returned 2 days later, the city was already awake and restless. She dropped her suitcase in the hallway and exhaled, brushing wind-blown hair from her face. Alex met her at the door. For a second they just looked at each other. Two people who had forgotten how to begin. "You're home," he said. "I am," she answered, her voice tired but not cold. She stepped forward, hesitated, then hugged him. It wasn't the embrace of passion or even habit. It was something quieter, like a truce. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee, sunlight flickering across the walls. "How was it?" he asked. "Exhausting," she said, then added. "But good. We signed the new contract. It'll help the company a lot." "That's great." She nodded, stirring her cup. "Mom said you fixed half the dacha." He smiled. "Not half. Maybe a quarter." "She sounded lighter," Marina said after a pause. "She hasn't sounded like that in a long time. She just needed company." Marina looked at him. "And you?" He met her gaze. "I needed quiet." She leaned back, studying him. "You look different. Calmer." He nodded slowly. "The house does that to you." For a while neither spoke. The air between them wasn't strained anymore, just full of things waiting to be said. Finally Marina sighed. "Alex, I know I've been hard to reach. I bury myself in work because it feels safe. But sometimes I wonder if I'm protecting myself from everything, including you." He looked down at his hands. "And I stopped trying to reach you because I didn't want to make it worse. I thought distance meant peace." "It didn't," she said softly. "No," he agreed. "It didn't." They sat in the small silence that followed, the kind that felt like soil before new growth. "Maybe," she said, "we could go to the dacha next weekend. Together. Just to see her. And maybe to start over a little." He smiled faintly. "I think she'd like that. And you." "So would I." A week later, the three of them stood on the porch together. Elena was trimming the lilacs again, her hands steady, her expression unreadable. When she saw them walking up the path, her face lit in a way that words couldn't describe. "Look at you two," she said, pretending not to wipe at her eyes. "You made it." Marina laughed and hugged her mother tightly. "I missed this place." "I missed you," Elena whispered. Alex stood back for a moment, taking in the scene. The same porch, the same trees, but everything subtly changed. The air felt alive again. They spent the day mending the rest of the fence, repainting the window frames, and picking early apples from the orchard. The laughter came more easily than it had in years. At one point, Marina turned to Alex, a streak of paint on her cheek, and said, "You know, you're not bad at this country life." "I had a good teacher," he said, glancing toward Elena. Elena only smiled. "You both just needed reminding that life isn't something you rush through." That evening, the three of them sat outside as the sky turned violet. The garden was quiet except for the soft chirring of crickets. Elena poured tea for everyone, her movements slow, deliberate. "To new beginnings," she said simply. Marina raised her cup. "And to the old places that still wait for us," Alex added. "And to the people who remind us who we are." They drank in silence. After a while, Marina rested her head on Alex's shoulder, and he felt something ease inside him. Not the electric spark of new love, but the calm warmth of something rediscovered. Elena watched them quietly, a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. For the first time in years, she felt that the house and her family were whole again. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of lilac and pine through the air. Somewhere a dog barked in the distance. Elena stood, gathering the empty cups. "You two stay out here a little longer. The night's too beautiful to waste." Marina reached out, catching her mother's hand. "Come sit with us." Elena hesitated, then nodded and sat back down. The three of them watched as the last light faded behind the trees, the first stars appearing one by one. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The silence now wasn't emptiness, it was peace.